First, tensions boiling up between the U.S. and two of its top foreign adversaries. Chinese and Russian officials are condemning U.S. military action near their borders and touting the, quote, unbreakable friendship between the two countries. Coinciding with a virtual meeting between Beijing and Moscow defense leaders yesterday, the Chinese government issued a statement accusing the U.S. of undermining regional stability by recently sailing a guided missile destroyer through the Taiwan Strait. Tensions between China and Taiwan have increased in recent months, with fears China may be plotting an invasion of its neighbor. President Biden last month pledged to support Taiwan in the event of an invasion. As for Russia, Kremlin officials blasted the U.S. for an alleged increase in military advisors and weapons systems near the country's border with Ukraine. This comes as recent satellite images show Russian forces amassing near the Ukraine border, sparking invasion concerns there. Touting China's alliance with Russia, Beijing's defense official said yesterday, quote, standing in the face of frantic U.S. containment and pressure, China and Russia are united together like a great mountain. Our friendship is unbreakable.
It is to laugh. Let's bring in right now President of Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, and columnist and associate editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius. Richard Haass, like an unbreakable mountain, I don't even know where to go with that, given the history between China and Russia. But let's talk about the dangers facing the world, the Biden administration, the tough decisions they're going to have to be making. You have two countries that have designs on two different countries, Taiwan and Ukraine, and they both look poised to strike. Could yesterday's meeting, could the joint statement be basically a sign that both may move on their invasions at a time when it will be hard for the United States to push back?
Look, Joe, we can only measure capabilities. We can't measure intentions. I don't think either is imminent. The China pressure against Taiwan, I think, is longer term. I'm not sure China's yet reached the point where it has all the military capability it would want, need. Russia, though, is very close. If it wanted to launch a massive invasion against Ukraine. Look, these two countries have two things in common. One is their fundamental illiberalism. They are authoritarians, and they really want a very different world order where the kinds of things we're pushing in democracy and human rights don't happen. And then they are in a position, and it gets at this opening thing that Mika just talked about, that they each could potentially benefit from a crisis in the other's backyard, and they might seek to exploit it. So one of the things the Biden administration has to think about is not simply how we deter a crisis in each of these two areas, but also how we prepare for both simultaneously, because I don't think it's possible to rule out a kind of tactical exploitation by Russia or China if there is a crisis elsewhere in the world.
Well, and David Ignatius, that's exactly the concern. I think that many people in the foreign policy field around Joe Biden are having. The fact that we had this joint statement yesterday, and you have China ready to go after Taiwan. Been talking about it, obviously, for decades. And, of course, Russia poised to go into Afghanistan. Could they do it simultaneously in a bid to present such an overwhelming challenge to the United States that we cannot respond to either?
I think that's obviously the message they're sending. I see two basic points about this, Joe. The first is alliance mobilization, if you will. And it's always scary when you get these statements of commitment by allies in a period of tension. It reminds us of 1914 and the lead up to World War I, where affirmations of alliances were a key part of the buildup. Russia and China have nominal commitments that were renewed, but this was more specific and graphic language. The thing that worries me more is the way in which these statements seem to suggest an equivalence between Taiwan, which China regards as part of China, that it will someday regain. And the U.S. is committed on paper to the idea that there's one China, although we try to defer when that would ever be resolved. And Russia's view, which Putin stated in a 5,000-word essay last summer that nobody really read, saying that Ukraine is part of Russia. Historically, it's always been part of the Russian homeland. And this equivalence between the two makes me worried that Russia is now putting Ukraine on that same status that Taiwan has been, that we will recover this. If not this month, next month, if not next month, next year. The forces that Russia has now on the Ukraine border are not seen as sufficient for a full invasion. There are actually fewer today than there were last April when there was an earlier fear that Russia might go over the border. But they are building. There's intelligence that suggests that Russia has much wider ambitions. So I'd note this is mobilization, but also it may be putting Ukraine in a different category.
I know Willie's going to get to more on Taiwan in just a moment, but Richard Haass, can I just ask, do you just broadly, do we understand this perhaps as China and Russia sensing U.S. weakness in any way and capitalizing on it?
The short answer is yes. They've seen what's happened over the last few years, whether it was not honoring the so-called red line in Syria under the Obama administration. Then the Trump administration moved away from American allies, abandoned the Kurds in the Middle East. Most recently, you had the Biden administration implementing the Trump administration's exit from Afghanistan. They see the United States in eternal disarray. You know, Joe was talking about this, or David rather, that there's aspects of pre-1914 internationally. Well, if you look at the United States, there's aspects of the 1850s internally. So they see a United States that's divided and distracted. Everybody's talking about Build Back Better or America First. So, yeah, I do think there's a sense of opportunity, given that the United States, which for the last 3/4 of a century has played this outsized role in the world, that we're no longer prepared to do it. It's simply not a priority for us, and we no longer have the necessary political unity. So, yeah, I do think both Russia and China are intrigued by whether this opens up strategic opportunities for them.
David, there's another layer to this story this morning. The Biden administration has invited Taiwan to its Summit for Democracy next month. 110 countries are included on the State Department's invitation for the virtual event, which aims to help strengthen democracies worldwide. Neither China nor Russia are included on the list. A spokesperson for China's Taiwan Affairs Office said the inclusion of Taiwan was a, quote, mistake. Why is this invite significant, David? We heard further from China yesterday that said the United States needs to deal with China as what it calls one China and not with Taiwan as the self-governing democracy, which you and I know it is.
So the Chinese will be upset by the inclusion of Taiwan in this Summit of Democracies for two reasons. First, it gives Taiwan a quasi-sovereign status, treating it as one of the nations that will be invited to this conference. And, of course, China says, no, Taiwan is part of the nation of China. And the U.S., on paper, at least, continues to recognize that. More fundamentally, this Summit of Democracies is going to remind the world what is different about Taiwan. I visited Taiwan. Taiwanese democracy is pretty amazing. That people, especially young Taiwanese, are passionate about the kind of freedom that they have. They're like the kids in Hong Kong. They don't want to live in an authoritarian country. And Chinese look to Taiwan and see this continuing democracy, and it worries Beijing. So it's a significant step. I think one interesting question is whether other countries that are invited, the France's, Germany's, our other democratic friends around the world, will get nervous because the Chinese are really going to turn up the heat on this and will be more wary of Taiwan than the U.S. would like them to be.
You know, and Taiwan is an extraordinary country. I had the opportunity while in Congress to go over to the first inauguration of their first democratically elected president and was struck by the country, by the business climate, by the culture. It is a strong, vibrant country, Richard. And I do wonder if we are starting to finally see some pushback to the continued bad behavior of President Xi. We've seen him move on Hong Kong, of course, the expansion of concentration camps with Uyghurs, the continued militarization of the South China Sea, bombastic rhetoric over the past several months. We have played this fiction with China, that Taiwan is a country whose name shall not be mentioned. And I'm just wondering if the United States is finally starting to push back against this bad behavior, and if President Xi and the rest of the leadership in China will soon find out that at some point their abhorrent behavior is they're going to be held accountable for it.
Well, Joe, there is a consensus that China is acting badly at home and abroad, and we are pushing back. I think the entire strategic orientation of U.S. foreign policy is now moving to counter China. You are seeing greater willingness to come to Taiwan's defense if need be, but I think not as far as you're taking it. We don't see Taiwan as a country. We only see one China. The final status has to be worked out peacefully between the mainland and Taiwan. And we don't want to provoke a crisis. If Taiwan moves in the direction of independence, if it declares independence, if it's recognized as sovereign, I do think that will trigger